Hello folks! Sandwiched between two major urban regions, metropolitan areas of great size, lies an area that is surprisingly very tame, quiet and tranquil, very remote away from the rest of California's major centers of population. And additionally, it's a region that is largely undeveloped when you compare it to the big behemoths surrounding it. Of this central coast, you're going to find the Salinas Valley, a major agricultural area. And within the Salinas Valley, at the very tip of it, you're going to find the Monterey Bay. This is technically the Pacific Ocean, but it's surrounded by a large area of land. That's what makes it a bay, the Monterey Bay. So, after about a week and a half to 2 weeks of going to the westernmost parts of the continental US, we've reached the Pacific coast. We saw the coast when we were in San Juan Capistrano, and now we see the coast here in Monterey, California, here in the central coast area. We can't really go further west than the ocean unless we want to take a big boat and see what's in the Pacific Ocean. I don't have the time nor resources. It costs a lot of money. So we're limited to doing what we can on the Pacific coast. And that means we have to go northward in a northern direction, thus above Southern California's pristine, warm atmosphere is the central coast. It's substantially colder here, but the ocean moderates the temperature so that people along this coast don't have to suffer through the grueling winters full of snow and extremely cold weather. It's actually very, very mild here, and although it's a bit chilly, it's very tolerable here. On average, California's central coast is a lot less sunny, and although it is kind of a sunny day here, just an hour ago it was full overcast. So on average, it's not going to be the sunny beaches that you see on this coast. No, it's most likely going to be colder, cloudier, more overcast days that you'll find here. Now, although the city of Monterey seems to us right now as just a little coastal beachside town, it wasn't always this way. It was once the city to be in California, as we'll discover today. It's also a city that is famous for its immaculate, outstanding coastal beauty, which we will furthermore see, not just on this little beach area that we're starting out on, but throughout the whole coast of the Monterey Bay. So today, let us explore the historically rich and wealthy, not to mention naturally beautiful, city of Monterey, California, here on the central coast. If Monterey, California is known for one thing, and there's one thing only that you should know, it is the abundant historical treasure trove that this whole city is. It may be small, but it packs so much. That church behind us is the oldest stone building in all of California, and of course that means it's the oldest building in Monterey. This is the old Presidio Chapel. And around the same time that the missions were occurring, the Spanish lay people wanted to found all these towns along the coast where they did have considerable colonial influence. So they set up shop right here in Monterey. But although the San Carlos Cathedral was built towards the end of the 1700s, already a pretty early date in American history, the history of Monterey goes back even further to 1770 when Father Junipero Serra, that Father Junipero Serra, who founded a lot of these missions across the California coast. He held a huge influence upon the settlement and establishment, development of Monterey as we know it. And the great thing about this city is that it dedicates an entire 2-mile round not hiking, we're not in the woods, but walking tour of the history of Monterey, the path of history, as it's called. Much like Boston's Freedom Trail, the path of which we've just veered off, but much like that Freedom Trail in Boston, the path of history tells the story of Monterey's beginnings and its development as one of the great Californian cities. Oh, we're back on. So we're now at the Custom House Plaza. This is essentially the center of it all. All the action here in Monterey stems from this little plaza, right? So a custom house was a big deal back in the day, and it still is in some cities. Monterey's custom house allowed a lot of foreign shipments from the commercial trade that was spurred by the Presidios being here. Excuse those. But a lot of the commercial activity here in Monterey demanded that things be processed in an orderly fashion. And this is where it sort of all occurred. Around here in the center of Monterey, you can find all this historic architecture, lots of adobes. Oh, fun. There's now the California flag here, but maybe back in the day it wouldn't have been the American or the Californian flag, but rather the Mexican or the colonial Spanish flag that would have flown. At one point in time, under both the Spanish and Mexican rule, this Monterey was the only port of entry from the Pacific in California. Monterey has a lot of firsts that tourism industries here in Monterey love to be proud of. One of which is the first brick house, which is right here. Yeah, not much, but yeah, first brick house. This Monterey path of history is home to over 50 historic sites, and they're all yours to discover if you're willing to walk. Look at that, California's first theater. Lots of firsts, once again. For as large as us Americans know the state of California to be, well, California itself in the US is just one of a larger region known as California. Mexico has its own California, Baja California, Lower California, which is divided up into two of Mexico's states, Baja California and Baja California Sur. So California used to be a much larger area, but the Spanish and Mexican government did make a distinction. The California we know of today, that's Alta California, higher California. And Monterey, well, that was the pristine capital of this region, Alta California. It's no wonder, back in the early to mid 1800s, this place was a very prosperous area. The lands of California were at one point mostly governed directly under the church or the crown of the Spanish government, but that all changed with Mexican independence. The lands were secularized and were given to wealthy ranchers in control of these Californios, these ranchos. And from Mexican independence until the Mexican-American War, this largely stayed the same, these lands being turned over into private hands. But when the Americans defeated the Mexicans in the Mexican-American War, they were given a lot of land in the West, including the lands of California and Monterey. And here for a good year or so, there was no real reason to give these such far western lands statehood. But of course things change. The tides of history will always work in surprising ways. The most frontier desolate lands may someday become the most prized possessions. And that's what happened with the gold rush. The gold rush saw tons of Americans coming west to California. As a result, the US government, after denying statehood to California for a long time, were like, okay, you know what, we have enough people. There's enough reason to settle these lands. Let's turn California into a state. And Colton Hall, just over there, is where the California Constitution was established. This may just very well be the most important building in all of California, right here in Monterey. The oldest city in California? No, sadly, it just got beaten out by San Diego down at the very south of the state. Those darn rascals of San Diego beat you guys, Monterey. Okay, here's where it gets crazy. We are at the beginning of the Monterey Bay Coastal Trail, and we start off not too far from that Customs Plaza, but we are about to go on a different direction. That way. The Monterey Bay is full, teeming with all sorts of wildlife. I mean, back there we saw those harbor seals. Monterey is home to California's largest sea otter population. There's seals, sea lions, and yeah, they're all different species. I can't even tell a distinction between them. It's no wonder that these fisheries and canning operations thrived in this environment. But that's where the problem kicks in. These opportunities were too great around this Monterey Bay that overfishing depleted this body of water's natural abundance of wildlife, and the industry died out. But luckily, Cannery Row preserves the era in Monterey's timeline where that district was full of businesses that had to do with the canning of sardines and other small little fish. My goodness, this coastline's immaculate. It reminds us of the time we spent in the state of Maine with all these jagged, rocky shorelines. That's the same thing here in Monterey. And yeah, the Monterey Bay Coastal Trail continues evermore. It's gonna be a long walk. I find the atmosphere so enchanting. Birds flying all above us. Turquoise crystalline waters. A rocky, jagged shoreline of great proportions. Water crashing on it. Oh, how beautiful. There are quite a few beautiful locations thus far, and I think Monterey, maybe not the downtown or any of the shops, but just the coast is probably the most spectacular view I've seen thus far. We have the great Monterey Bay, part of the Pacific Ocean, right next to us. It's terrific. A couple hours ago, it was bright and sunny. Actually getting there quite warm. But now the weather has completely changed. Maybe it's just because we've gotten so close to the coast, but it is gray and cloudy. Honestly, it's my ideal weather. Not too cold, not too warm, not too sunny, not a rainstorm. It's perfect. You know, I wish the sunburn I have can just change and disappear as quickly as the weather here at Monterey within a few hours. But we all have our desires and wants. Well, we've reached the northernmost coastline. The furthest point on land one can walk on land at the Monterey Bay. Take a look at the distance. Now past those rocks, can you see the next shoreline? Yeah, that's how far we've walked. Let me tell you, vasculitis is real and it's painful. Yeah, it's almost 6 p.m. and I still have an hour and a half walk just to get back to my car. But I think this view is so worth it. Tons of these beautiful views. Hello, seagull. So I think there's no better point at which to end this whole grand day here in Monterey. I mean, we've done a lot today. So there's no better point at which to end it off than Point Pinos. The Monterey Bay Coastal Trail is long and arduous. Are you up for the task? You should be, because the views are excellent all along the way. I'm here at what I personally would consider the end of a worthwhile hike. I think it's a hike more than a walk at this point. So, yeah, let's bask in the views around us. Monterey is a town of 30,000 people. By far, it's not California's largest city. There are tens and tens more cities that are larger, but I think Monterey is totally worth the visit. You get a bit of the great California history, you get a bit of the natural views. All in all, it's an outstanding visit, outstanding destination. I would totally recommend. Skip over the big tourist spots. Come here to Monterey. I mean, it is kind of a big tourist spot, but whatever. I think it's a tourist spot that is worth its title as a tourist spot. I mean, talk about best of the most west. Do you want to see the city that has the most amount of historic buildings on any city in the West Coast? Do you want to see the beauty of West Coast nature at its finest? Then you better come here to Monterey. It's so important that even Apple named one of its operating systems after this beautiful place, OS Monterey. When the Spanish were going up this west coast of California, searching for a bay proclaimed to be so promising for the future of their dreams of colonization. The San Francisco Bay, which was a lot more promising, well, it was too foggy, so they overlooked it. They didn't think it was that important. They ended up here on the Monterey Bay. Or at least that's what they figured was that bay that was so promising. So, Monterey, you should be thankful that fog exists, because now you can claim that your city was at one point the best of California. My last question before I shut this camera off is, the central coast of California, is it considered NorCal or SoCal? I'm from the east, I don't know the west coast as intimately as maybe some of you are. So please, if you have an idea of what the central coast is, tell me. You know, does it fall under one distinction? Maybe? Is it all uniform? Or are there certain parts, does it depend on what part of the central coast you are? That determines whether you are NorCal or SoCal. So, that's all I have. I'm winded, I gotta go back. It is getting late. So, looking one more time at this amazing Monterey Bay. Tired as ever. More travels to come. I will see you at the next location.